All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to an episode of Between Two Studs. My name is Alex Studd.
And I'm Ron Studd.
And Ron, for episode 45, tonight on the show, we have Mr. Matt Holliday. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Alex, and thanks for having me on.
Absolutely glad to have you on. We're going to get into the Ember Round, but before we do, as tradition, Ron and I pay tribute to both you as the guest and to our official sponsor, Malort, the official spirit of Between Two Studs. Cheers to you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
So, I assume you've never had Malort, but there's lots of bottles of this around all of our friends in Westchester. They have it at their home. So when you go to, especially from my era, just ask for Malort. They'll gladly have a bottle of this ready for you to try.
So, I'll keep that in mind. Next time I'm at Justin's house, it'll be my first request.
Justin has a bottle. Matt has a bottle. Tim has a bottle.
Well, and you're forgetting something, too. Through the evangelization of another friend of the show, there are 5 restaurants in Delaware that now carry it as well.
Oh.
So
it's true. So before our friends got introduced to this was you could only find this in Chicago. It's only produced. It's made in Chicago. It's a Chicago delicacy. But it is taking the East Coast by storm. So,
one guest at a time. I love it.
One guest at a time. That's right. So, Matt, buckle up. You're into what we call the Ember Round. The Ember Round is really a way for us to get to know you and kind of get things going. I call it, it's kind of like the slow burn, right? We'll get to know you a little bit, and then we'll kind of spend the rest of the show getting to know you even more. So, to kick things off, how do you know us? What's the story? What's the connection?
So I met Ron about 7 minutes ago, but I have known
8.
Alex 8. Okay. I've known Alex for, 10 years, maybe a little bit more.
Believe it or not, fall 10.
Yeah.
So
12 years.
Like
Wow.
12.
Wow.
Yeah.
So Alex was inducted into the Friar Society, which was my fraternity in college. I was a little bit older, and I would come back to support the Brotherhood in various ways after I graduated. I was the vice president of their alumni association for a long time. And so people would tell me, you've got to meet Alex. He's obsessed with history. He's a big nerd. He's obsessed with the Friars. Like, he's got a binder with all the stuff in it. He heard about your binders. He wants to borrow them.
We had to compare binders.
We had to compare binders, as all nerdy history type inclined people do. And so that was my introduction to Alex, and I never looked back after that.
awesome.
The
So
connection
tell
of
us-
the binders.
Yes.
So if you wouldn't mind, tell us a little bit about yourself. What are your areas of interest?
Sure. So I'm somebody who's very motivated by community. I lived in a lot of different places growing up, and so I really did not have a community. We were constantly moving 13 times in my first 18 years. So when I came to Westchester, I fell in love with this area. I've served on over 20 different nonprofit boards in the area. I'm motivated by not only community service, but also public service. So I was an elected official for a while in the area. And so travel, history, politics, you name it. I'm interested in the nerdier pursuits of service here in town.
That's fantastic. And we're going to dive into that. Until then, though, very important question we ask all of our guests. What are you currently drinking?
Yeah, so I'm going to be a disappointment to you on that front. I am drinking water. I come from a long line, 300 and some years worth of male holidays from the land grant of King George III in South Carolina, all of whom are raging alcoholics. So while I do imbibe quite a bit, I have a firm rule that I will not drink when I'm alone. And being connected to you two virtually does not give me a hall pass to skip out.
It does not check the box.
It does not.
That's fair.
I would
That's
have
fair.
needed an in-studio guest with me in order to achieve better than that. So unfortunately, that's what I'm sticking with.
No, I respect that. And is it high quality Westchester tap water?
You know what? It has been filtered through the best of all Brita has to offer. So it is
Wow.
on point.
Wow. Well, there you go. Ron, what are you drinking tonight?
So tonight, I'm having some Georgia Moonshine.
Ooh.
This is Georgia Distiller Select Single Barrel Cask Strength Bourbon from Moonrise Distillery. And I've had it down here before. It is a really, really interesting bourbon that's got a lot of flavor to it. And it's not super well known just because it's a Georgia distillery. Not many people are going out there actively looking for Georgia distilled bourbon. And it's got a lot of complexity. I love it for the flavor and the complexity, and well, worth checking out if you're ever down here. You can find it. What about you, Alex?
Yeah. So I've had this on the show before, too. For those listening, I generally like to find a drink that somehow is connected to the guest, if I can. Of course, I don't have anything from southeastern Pennsylvania tonight, but I do have some Pennsylvania bourbon. And I've talked about this on a show before. It's called Wiggle. And, the story is Ron and I, and there was a previous guest we had on, Stuart Gray, who explained to us through history that, and you might know this, Matt, that the origin of bourbon country in the United States was Western Pennsylvania.
Yep.
And it was of course the Whiskey Rebellion. Thank you, Alexander Hamilton, that said, all right, screw this. We don't want to get taxed on this. Where can we go where they can't really regulate us and tax us? Let's go somewhere further west. They ended up in Kentucky, which is obviously where bourbon country is today. But every time I drink this, I think this is what our founding fathers, this is what real bourbon was 200 and X years ago. Right? So in honor of you tonight, having a little Pennsylvania beverage.
I appreciate that, and I appreciate that you're both having bourbon, because bourbon is one of my favorite go-tos, and I couldn't agree with you more, Alex. If it wasn't for George Washington being willing to use the militia early on, perhaps no one would even think of Kentucky, and Pennsylvania would still be the glorious
king
of bourbon. That's right.
Yeah, you're gonna. So I don't mean to talk up an episode while we're already having another guest on. But we had an episode with Stuart Gray where we went all into the history of bourbon and whiskey in this country and go all into the Whiskey Rebellion. So if you're interested in that topic, check that episode out.
Very cool.
So,
Ron, this is a very popular question. Why don't you ask it the next one?
Okay. So, Matt, the question that we're leading in, and man, hopefully we don't set the bar too high, but the question really is, what is a piece of art that really speaks to you or defines you? And just to be clear, art can really mean anything. In one of our recent episodes, I kind of went a little bit George Harrison-like and was talking about any abstract thought or idea involving language.
I was talking about the leaves and the trees.
Yeah, we went a little crazy.
Yeah, a little too transcendental.
But, I mean, we've had movies, books, traditional pieces of art, visual art. We even had somebody who did a marathon. So whatever you want. Hip-hop albums. It can be anything that just kind of resonates with you. And tell us about that.
So first of all, I love this question. I don't listen to a lot of podcasts, so I don't know if you two originated it, but it certainly was the first time I had ever heard someone pose this question to another. So I'm a little more traditionalist. You don't have to worry about me describing leaves. For me, I would say it's a piece of music, and it actually dovetails nicely into my love of Westchester, because Samuel Barber, who was a very famous composer, was born and raised here in town. And in fact, I walk past his house every single day.
Right on Church Street, baby.
That's right. And he composed Adagio for Strings, which is one of the most hauntingly beautiful pieces of classical music you will ever hear. And at the risk of starting this on a very depressing note, it is on my list of pieces of music to be played at my funeral. So,
well, that was going to be our next question.
Yeah,
so, I'm glad two birds, one stone.
Get it out of the way while you can. Right.
I was thinking for a second that you were going to go Herb Alpert, because we have had a few people from Westchester specifically cite Herb Alpert
and the Tijuana Brass.
And the Tijuana Brass with that album. What's the album name?
Whipped Cream and Other Delights. Yeah, this is in a very different direction.
Yeah,
right. Very different. But
so
like
Ron, you would know this song. It's been in so many movies.
Yeah.
Probably most famously in the I just said most famously, and I'm blanking on the name. The Tom Hanks movie. They go to Europe. They're D-Day,
Oh, Saving Private Ryan.
Saving Private Ryan.
Same Private Ryan.
Which is one of my favorite movies. So, there you go.
Yeah. You're hauntingly beautiful is the best way to describe that. And he had if I understand correctly, a very fascinating life where, this was the early 20th century, an incredible composer, but he was gay. And of course, in the early 20th century, people weren't exactly friendly on that. And so he kind of got ostracized, and it makes you wonder where his career could have potentially wound up if there weren't doors that were kind of probably kept him. Yeah. Very cool. I certainly love that song too. So
Good.
All right. Last question of the Amber Round. This was added in season 2. We talked about it before we went on the air. So Ron and I started this podcast sort of as a response to COVID. And I think Ron and I, we like to have a positive, upbeat show. And we've been asking our guests, hey, this was a horrible thing, this COVID, this global pandemic. But where's the silver lining in all this? We like to ask our guests, what is something that's positive that has come from this that ideally will you take with you, right? You grew, you matured, you found a new hobby or interest, something positive. So what has that been for you?
So I'm actually sitting in it. I'm in my home office right now. And when COVID started, I was in a 800 square foot apartment on Church Street in Westchester, actually a block away from Samuel Barber's house. And I did not grow up with a lot of money. So the idea of buying a home in Westchester, for those who aren't familiar, we have an absurd property value base around here, and cost of living. Yeah, cost of living is pretty high. So I never really saw myself buying anytime soon. But when COVID hit, I had started a new job a couple months before, and I was over participating in Zooms from my love seat in my living room. So I actually bought a home in July of 2020, which at the time seemed batshit crazy to me because it was very difficult. You weren't allowed to come with anyone else to look at the place. Your realtor wasn't even allowed to be inside with you at the same time most of the time. And so there were a lot of weird rules, but it turns out it was one of the better decisions of my life, because shortly thereafter, the market around here just went absolutely nuts, to the point where my home appreciated $100,000 in the first 10 months I owned it, which was just stupid. God. It's just stupid. It goes to show you these bubbles are completely fabricated by, supply and demand and all that kind of stuff. But around here, it was particularly acute. Nationally, it happened as well, but here it was really rough. So I made the right choice, apparently. It just didn't seem like it at the time. So this lovely home that I'm fortunate enough to have is my COVID silver lining.
And you're going to be there for a long time. You're not going to be moving around as much.
Probably, yes. At some point,
you're more stationary.
Yes, at some point I'd like to be back in the absolute dead center of town, but I'm still in the borough, which is all that matters.
Well, I'll say this. I didn't realize you lived on Church Street. That is my absolute favorite street in all of Westchester for anyone listening. Anytime I had to go up to Market or Gay Street, just uptown from the university, I would always want to walk down on my way home back to school. I'd always want to walk down Church Street. So that's really cool.
Yeah.
All right. Hey, congratulations. You made it through the Ember Round. I know that was stressful. I know it was hard. Yeah.
There was only 2 questions.
It was 4. All right,
it's
maybe 5. I don't know. For someone,
no, it's 5. It is 5.
So, okay.
Yeah.
Someone's at home going, I counted.
It was so easy that it seemed like 2 questions.
We're going to get some feedback on this one.
That's a lot of confidence. All right. Well, so we're going to keep going. We're going to keep plugging along. This is something we've introduced more recently, and it's been a fan favorite. So we're going to keep it going. We call this the speed round. Obviously, an original name we came up with. No one else had ever used that term before.
Sure.
The idea is we're going to give you a topic, a passion, an interest, something, right, that ties to you. You give us under 5 words or less. You can use up to 5. You can use 1 word if that's all that you need to explain it, and then Ron and I might say, okay, give us a little bit more. So Ron and I are going to go back and forth on the word, or on what it is, and then you just give us your honest thoughts, your initial thoughts. That sound good?
Sounds great.
All right, number 1. Sealing the floors of airplane hangars at Dover Air Force Base.
Far too young for it.
How old were you?
I was 8, I believe, and I'm pretty sure it was illegal.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I don't think OSHA would have approved.
No.
So you were 8 years old, and I assume in the middle of summer.
Oh, yeah.
Active military base.
Active military base, some pretty potent chemicals. There was a lot going on there.
Jet fuel by chance?
I imagine there was jet fuel. It was a long time ago.
Well, I'm glad you got clearance to go on the base.
Yeah.
I think things were different back then. 1993 was a special year for this republic, and things were not quite as intense pre 9/11.
Yeah,
for sure. All right, working at Maggie Moo's ice cream shop.
Teenage shift manager. It's rough.
So were you a teenager managing a bunch of other teenagers?
Yes.
Yeah, did they hate you?
I think all the management positions I've had in my life, I think most of my staff have really liked me. I've always strived for that. But back then, before I really smoothed out my management style, I'm sure I was not beloved.
Yeah. Plus, it's tough. Teenagers are tough.
They are.
Teenagers suck. Let's be honest. Any
really
teenagers
do.
listening, any teenager listening right now, which would be way outside our demographic, you probably suck.
I'm pretty sure we
Probably.
lost them at Adagio for Strings. They turned off this program right then. So I apologize for costing you your demographic.
Yeah, no, that's quite okay. It's okay. Next one. In the complete other direction of the young demographic, you've been called, and I've heard other people call you this, someone who was born an 80-year-old man. What are your thoughts to that?
Very, very true. I came out that age.
So now you got to be like 110 or 100.
Yeah.
Or do you have like a
18?
Benjamin Button kind of thing going where you're like getting younger as you go?
I am not getting younger. I wish I was.
Okay.
If anything, I am sitting on a porch somewhere metaphorically shaking my fist at someone.
Fair enough. All right. Being a campaign manager.
Shockingly difficult for egos.
I don't know how to follow up that one. It
Same.
seems good.
Yeah.
Being a bag boy and cart guy at Acme Supermarkets.
Surprisingly fulfilling.
Fulfilling. You got to give me a little more than that.
Back then, there were a lot of people who were really grateful for a young person who gave them good service. And so I had a kind of an elderly customer following who would specifically go to my line.
No way.
Yeah. You would be surprised at the relationships. I can't speak for the whole country, but here in southeastern Pennsylvania, there are a lot of people who are just as attached to their grocers or grocery store employees as they are to their hairdresser, barber, what have you.
Wow. And how old were you when you were a bag boy?
14. It was my first legal job right after I got my working papers.
Wow. Huh.
See, it's interesting you mentioned that.
Go ahead.
It's interesting you mentioned that too. Like, now that I moved to the South, I've noticed like the Publix here, they've kind of got this weird like Chick-fil-A kind of style thing going on where it's like the whole my pleasure, that sort of thing. And they'll actually be like, "Sir, do you need any help carrying this to your car?" And I'm like, "I think I'll manage, but I appreciate the offer." That's not something I really would ever have seen in the Northeast. But
I will say this, though, Ron. I do think every part of the country, there is some business that has like a strange cult following. And I know that's not exactly the same thing. But it's like where, Matt, you are. It's like Wawa. Like, I like Wawa. I'm not here to knock on Wawa. But it is like strangely cult-like.
Oh, yeah.
People like love Wawa. It's like when I'm in town, I'm like, it's good. I wish there was a Wawa in Chicago, but like,
you're probably
you
having
guys
hate mail drafted by someone who's listening right now that you would dare impede the glory that is Wawa.
Yeah,
somebody
strange.
who's got an IV hooked to them of Wawa iced tea.
Yep,
they're upset now. So,
and then you drive 3 hours west, and you're in the Sheets land, and you talk to people in Sheets people, and they're like, Wawa people suck, and it's like, I don't understand. Are they paying you? Like, yeah. I don't understand.
There are stipends that go out. Yeah, they've been buying population centers for years.
Yeah, I thought so. Next one, the Friar Society.
Best experience of my life.
Wow. And I can't disagree with that. We talked about it earlier. It is amazing the amount of people that I've met and the people we've stayed in touch with. I mean, I totally was stalking you when I was putting some of these questions together.
I could tell.
I saw something that said, what, you've been in 8 different people's weddings that were all friars?
Yeah. Yep, and I'm godfather to 2 kids who were fratties. And frankly, the experience itself was trying at times, the 3 years I was in the society. But it's the life that's come from that experience that has been one of the best of my life.
And for our listeners at home who don't know what the friars are, it's not the people who work at McDonald's who are sitting there with the fries frying things, right?
Correct.
Well,
it's
we did do that part-time.
We used to do that at the Hospital Country Fair every single year. We ran their chicken content, and where we were the
you fry your tendies and that?
So, Ron, I will say this. We found very creative ways to raise money. We would adopt a family every Christmas time, a holiday family. Although when I first joined, I thought, Matt Holliday, are we raising money for him? I don't understand what's going on. The holiday family.
I dealt with that question a lot in college.
Yeah. We called it the Holiday Family, although it wasn't anything to do with Matt. And we would find all sorts of strange ways to raise money. Chicken parm dinners, and raking people's lawns,
Christmas caroling,
things that we can't talk about on the air.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of skull and bone society things, too, I've heard.
Yeah, oh, yeah. That's who we were.
Yeah, so it's the oldest student organization at Westchester University. It dates back to 1936, and at the time it was formed, student organizations were not allowed. So there's a lot of secrecy around our beginning, and we've maintained some of that. But essentially, it's a community service fraternity for men at Westchester.
Very cool. All right, Coldplay.
Just there last night. Ron is checking me. Ron is checking me on these 5-word answers.
You saw Coldplay last night?
I did.
That's crazy.
What are the odds of that? They were in Philly?
They were in Philly, and it was a great show. And I went with a lot of friars and abbeys, and it was a really good time.
I'll be honest with you, I was stalking you, but I wasn't stalking you to that level. I did not know that when we were recording this, you saw them the night before.
I don't even think I posted anything on social media about it. I'm tough to stalk nowadays. My social media presence has been diminished of late.
So Alex was not checking out your binders before we started recording, just to be clear.
Well, I think he has a few still that he never returned. So he very well
may have been
reading up my binders.
There were some things that I'm not proud of that got left behind when I graduated, and then at a certain point, the next class, I'm not throwing them under the bus, but the next group of kids, eventually we just threw out a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that's what happened. So, speaking of big, thick binders and books and pages of things that don't really serve much of a purpose in 2022, delivering phone books.
Not fun.
How many phone books would you have?
So I was a tiny kid, and I would take as many as I could carry. I was a human mule going up and down the streets of Newtown Square delivering phone books.
Did you put them in a wagon?
You know what? I wish I had had a wagon. No, it was out of the back of my mother's car. She had a VW5.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And we would.
This was also one of your illegal jobs.
One of my many child labor law jobs, violators for sure.
But, I mean, you got lifting in with that. Like, that's a pretty good... That's a way to get from being a scrawny kid to being a little bit beefier, right?
It was the original CrossFit, yes.
Yeah.
This last one, I have to say it, Ron. I know I'm going 2 in a row, but I was there. And I witnessed this. And one thing I'll say this, Matt, I don't know if you've changed in the last 10 years, and if you have, hey, great. But I've always known you as a little bit of a germaphobe. Not in a bad way, not to the point where it's like debilitating, but it's a thing.
Sure.
I saw a guy at a party, a Friars party. Believe it or not, we did occasionally have alcohol. Very rarely, of course. Very rarely.
Don't lie on air, Alex.
Yeah, so we had fun. And I saw a friar throw up on you. And if it was anybody else, had that person thrown up on anyone else, I think we would have laughed it off. But when it happened to you, knowing you're germaphobe, I remember it like it was yesterday. What were your talk about it?
Cosmic poetic justice. So he was my little brother, and in the society, and we're still friends to this day. He was texting me a couple hours ago, but our relationship was very symbolic of him not necessarily being where he was supposed to be or on top of what he was supposed to be on, and me being a bit of an overbearing, controlling father figure type. So his last night in the Friar Society, it was his senior night. He had always had a deep aversion to chugging, and it typically brought up some acid reflux medical stuff that he had. And there's a specific ceremony that we do that has no basis in any real history of the Friars. It probably started like 20 years ago. We're like,
don't tell the new guys.
Exactly.
Keep it going.
It's been going on since the 30s.
We're like,
it goes back.
Ceremony. But it involves chugging an entire beer. And I made the unfortunate mistake of trying to be emotionally supportive and stand next to him during the ceremony. And where I was standing, it was right at the entrance of the bathroom of this particular apartment. And so the moment he finished his activity, he turned to the right and vomited all over me. And John O'Brien, who I actually had lunch with today, and a good friend of mine, he still relives that moment in his mind. It's like one of his happy places he goes to, because he knows how symbolic it was of my relationship with my little brother, that his last act in the society would be to vomit all over me.
See, as I obviously was not there, but I'm kind of envisioning this, given, the way that you described yourself, what you were, especially like you're older than Alex. I kind of figured like a Don Corleone kind of thing.
Sure.
And it's like, why have you done this kind of thing? Like,
yes. But picture that, but with a lot of hot water and soap in the sink of this kitchen as I boiled myself. And then, Alex, I don't even know if you know the end of this story or not, but it's made so much better by the fact that I immediately walked home from the party through the center of our town and ran straight into one of our county commissioners who was with his wife, who knew me at the time, even though I was just a couple years out of college.
Here you are,
and I just covered in throw up. And all I remembered doing was making eye contact and going, "None of it's mine."
Which is so, that's even worse. Like, it's like, well, all this stuff that's on me, it's not me. It's someone else's.
Yeah, and what were you doing? Where was this place that you acquired all this wonderful decoration on your shirt? I don't want to say.
I ended up being a colleague of his. We worked together for a while when we were both elected officials, and we're still friendly to this day. And he's never asked me about it, so I never had to fill in on the details.
Oh, that's awesome.
Things happen at Westchester. I've heard. I'm not sure. I can't confirm, but I've heard. So I'm sure it wouldn't come as that so much of a surprise.
Well, and speaking of things that happen at Westchester, we're out of the speed round. You've made it through 2 separate rounds. Great job. But you graduated from Westchester in 2009.
Correct.
With a degree in poli-sci.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting to me because from what I understand, you wanted to be a teacher. So
Correct.
I assume you were probably going to teach like social studies or history or something like that. But you got into politics. What happened there? What's the story?
Yeah, so I came as a freshman as a history education major. Westchester was known as a education school, primarily music, secondary, and gym, but we had a strong history ed department too. So that's why I came. But as I may have mentioned earlier, I can't remember if we were recording at that point or not, I was not born into a family that had any resources, so I knew I had to put myself through college. And I wanted to make sure I had a decently paying career right out of the gate to start paying back loans. So history education always made sense to me. And I had this awesome faculty advisor. He was this Southern California surfs up beach bum who was teaching here in Pennsylvania for 30 some years at Westchester. And he used to tease me every single day. And he'd be like, Holliday, you'd be a good history teacher, but you need to be over at Ruby Jones making history. And he just busted me on it the entire freshman year when he would see me. And so finally I was like, I have no idea how I'm going to make a living as a politician, but this guy sees something. So I took the leap of faith and I switched my major at the end of freshman year to political science. And it worked out in a way, but it also took me down all sorts of weird paths. And so that's the background there. And part of me sometimes wonders what it would have been like if I had become a history education teacher, because I do love boring people with details. In fact, I just got back from Italy last week, and I was spending the entire time as a self-appointed tour guide. So
isn't that the best?
It really is.
Honestly, boring people with history, it's one of my passions.
Mine too.
Yeah, I think that's why we always got along.
I do like being a self-appointed tour guide, though. That's always kind of fun.
Yeah,
even
Ron
if you make
even if
you make it up as you go. Yeah.
Ron, before we go to break, Ron, why don't you tell that story? It's true. Ron we'd always find a 24-hour day Walmart. I don't even know where you came up with this idea. And you would create, like, we're going to go through a formal tour of the Walmart.
Right. So I think what it was is where we grew up, there was definitely not always the most entertaining of things going on. But one thing that I always found a little bit interesting is a Walmart, most of them are 24 hours, right? And there's an interesting group of people that come out at the late hours, right? You've got
the people who aren't socially allowed out in public during normal hours.
Right. They hide from the sun. Got it.
I think some of the people who hide from the sun, I think people who aren't native English speakers always, I think you've got kind of just a mix of everything. But it's definitely a little bit different, right? Because sometimes it's just like, think about it. Who do you know is going to go for like kitty litter at 2 a.m. in the morning? Somebody does, right? Anyway, so what I would do is usually my friends and I, we would have a few drinks, or maybe not even have a few drinks, but we'd somehow find ourselves at Walmart. And what do you do at that time of the morning? Well, I will give a tour. So as we'd walk in, I'd have my small little entourage. And as we'd go, I'd kind of make up stuff like, well, to your right, this is the sporting goods. Coincidentally, they don't just sell sporting goods. They sell sporting bads as well. And if you look back in the history with Sam Walton and his family, it goes back extensively, and you can go into the history of the Walton family and how they actually invented sports. You see, derivation of sports was, and you just keep making stuff up.
You just start making stuff up. And here's the crazy thing is, this sounds insane, but human beings, if there's one thing I've learned in my 30 years of life, is that if people see a line or a crowd,
they'll join.
People want to get in it. People just want to get in it. So all of a sudden, Ron has a couple people, I'd be there, and all of a sudden we'd have these strangers showing up, and all of a sudden Ron is giving a legitimate fake tour of Walmart to a decent amount of people. We're talking a dozen, 15, 20 people.
So were you the forerunner to drunk history? Were you the opener to that rich tapestry of culture that we now have?
I mean, I also gave Alex a tour of Westchester. That was one of the things I did. I made up.
That was one of the selling points. That was one of the selling points to me in Westchester was Ron and I. First time on the campus, it was the dead of winter, cold as hell, and everything's gloomy. The cold, gloomy days. And Ron is just pointing at buildings and making up facts about them. And at the end of the tour, I said, "This is the school for me, Ron.
Yeah,
this is the school." Oldest university in the world. I have to go there.
Yeah. Oldest university in the world. And
I just was at the University of Bologna last week, which is the real oldest university
it's Westchester.
It's Westchester in the Golden Rams.
See, what people don't know about Westchester that I've learned through my 2 minutes of arriving on site and making stuff up as I go.
Sure.
Is Westchester was actually there prior to known academia even getting started. It was the epicenter of academia. From there, the whole idea of the proliferation of knowledge spread to the Greeks, and it just became everywhere. And
Well, Ron,
it eventually found its way back.
You wanted to start a campaign for years that was changing Rami, the golden ram, to being Rami, the Egyptian ram. Am I correct in saying that?
Well, I was going to say Ramses the Great.
Ramses.
Right? And that's what I wanted Alex to do, but, you know, politics are what they are.
I was in SGA. I was in Student Government Association, and he did not take that seriously. Ramses the golden ram.
So
no,
Ron,
Ramses the Great.
I'm going to blow your and Alex's mind for a moment. I, too, was in SGA, and I was student body president. But prior to that, the Friar Society used to run a real live ram at our football games. And there were 5 of them, and they were named in subsection. There we go. When one would expire, they'd find another male ram, and he would become the second or third of his name, etc.
Sure.
And so they were named Ramesses. Were the names of the rams they used to run at the football game prior to, I don't know if it was PETA or somebody shutting us down and saying it wasn't humane to force a ram to run up and down the football field.
So I knew about this, and there's photos in those binders we've already talked about multiple times. I never knew the names of them. They were Ramses?
Yeah,
they were Ramses the ram?
Yeah.
Oh, my
or
God.
Ramesses, yeah.
Ramses the Great. I mean...
So, Ron, you were onto something when you were making that up.
I mean, Rami, just like as I put my hand across the screen like that, like all I'm thinking of is Barney. Just throw the Barney logo. It's just like, Rami, come see Rami over at Westchester. Like, it just doesn't sound like a college mascot. But if you say, come see Ramses the Great down at Westchester, he's going to blow your freaking mind. Go Rams! Like, that's kind of cool, right?
It's a palpable experience that I just...
Like, I got excited just yelling it, right?
I got tingles.
Yeah.
I got goosebumps.
We may have to fly Ron in to the Westchester University Foundation and just start pumping him for information of lies that we could use to solicit funds from our alumni base, because
I mean,
there's a lot.
I can make more up faster than they can disprove them. So
hey,
we'll just go.
Isn't that what being? I was going to say, isn't that politics just one step ahead?
It is now, sadly.
Yeah. Hey, speaking of that, we're going to go to break, and when we come back, we are going to get into some of the work, including the political career of Matt, and then we're going to talk about some of his nonprofits, and we do want to talk about Italy. So we will be right back with Matt Holliday.
We hope you're enjoying this episode so far. Wanted to let you know that if you ever need to reach out to Alex or myself, feel free to email us at between@twostuds.com. Again, that's between@twostuds.com. We'll get right back to the program. Enjoy.
All right, welcome back to Between Two Studs. We're hanging out with Matt Holliday. And one of the things that we talked about a little bit earlier, and I just find this to be very fascinating, is you grew up all over southeastern Pennsylvania. You were in Montgomery County. You were in Delaware County. You didn't really have any ties to Westchester. Sounds like you went to Westchester University because you wanted to be a teacher and you wanted to go to an affordable college. Yet, I would call you, these are my words, not yours, I would call you Mr. Westchester. So what happened during your college years that made you fall in love with Westchester, Pennsylvania, and Chester County?
It's a good question. Thank you, Alex. I didn't have the best childhood. My first 18 years on Earth were plagued with all sorts of unpleasantness. So when I came to Westchester, it was completely different for me. I kind of found the family that I had always wanted in friends and faculty, mentors, and people in student affairs, etc. So I kind of felt like I belonged for the first time because I actually had stability and people who cared. And so there was this deep desire to reciprocate that and to show my gratitude for a stable, wonderful environment by giving back so that other people would have the same thing. And just the town itself. I mean, when I first started at Westchester, it was nowhere near as beautiful as it is now, almost 20 years later. But it had a lot of potential, and it had a lot going for it. It was very walkable. And at the time, I didn't have a car. So it was just a confluence of things that clicked that made it kind of a special place for me. And I fell in love and immediately rolled up my sleeves and just participated in everything I could and gave back in any way I could.
And that's where you started getting into campaigns, right? You were a deputy campaign manager?
Yep,
while
my
in
sophomore
college.
year. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. And then you wound your way up into being working under Representative Dan Pruitt for quite a few years.
Truitt, yeah, I was his chief of staff right out of college, yep. And I did that for 5 years, and the only reason I left him is because I ran for office myself.
Which I think leads us to the next question.
Okay.
Ron.
So tell us, if you wouldn't mind, a little bit about your experience with running for office and what exactly you ran off for office for, and what was kind of the burning desire behind that, right? That had to have been a bit of a difficult decision to kind of even cast your hat in for politics.
Sure. So as a kid, I always wanted to be a assistant district attorney. I used to love Law and Order episodes when I could sneak them in because I wasn't really allowed to watch TV technically. But I love the idea of being that white knight that was getting justice for people and helping people and cleaning up the community. And then I realized that I could never afford the $120,000 worth of law school loans just to come out of law school and make $45,000 as an assistant district attorney. So when that dream went bye-byes, public service and local office kind of took its place. And so to answer you, Ron, I think that for me, as much as I enjoyed being a chief of staff to the state representative, and I worked on a lot of legislative issues here in Pennsylvania, and I headed up the staff's constituent service activities. I had 3 people under me who were working on that. And I found all of that very fulfilling. At the end of the day, the gentleman I worked for, he deferred to me a lot because he was new to politics. He was an engineer by trade, and he kind of got involved based on the debt being what it was and him not wanting his kids to have to pay that back. So he was operating without a safety net, and so essentially I was his safety net. So he deferred to me on a lot of things, but at the end of the day, we were on different spots on the political spectrum, and so I was pretty moderate by then the standards of the time and definitely by the standards of today, whereas he was not. And so over time, our disagreements on policy became more pronounced, and it just occurred to me that in order to be able to live my most authentic life, I would need to run for office myself, because when you're the elected official, the buck stops with you, and you're not saying, oh, sorry, my boss's position on this is X, Y, Z, and so I have to defend that. And so from there, it was what was the path, what were the stepping stones to elected office, because obviously I needed to be able to pay for the roof over my head, and professional political jobs are not as thick on the ground in southeastern Pennsylvania as some people might think. And so I ended up running for a position that has existed in Chester County since the late 1600s. It's actually older than the presidency of the United States. It's called County Prothonotary. And
Prothonotary.
Prothonotary. Have you been calling it prothonotary, you two? You probably have.
I didn't know how to pronounce it. I will say, just to quickly interrupt, I had to look this up. The origin of it goes back to 1447. It was recorded in England to mean principal clerk of a court.
Yes.
Now I know I'm kind of leading you, but what the heck does that mean?
Yeah, so because your fan base must be into boring history, since they listen to you 45 episodes, I'm going to take it a little further back than the 1400s. It's actually an old Greek term that means first scribe. and it's over 2,000 years old. The Romans actually had it as a prelate in the Roman Empire. The Catholic Church had a cardinal group that was referred to as Prothonotarians. So it goes way back, but the English definitely brought it into their civil court system structure, and then we got it from there. William Penn brought it over himself. And so Chester County is one of the 3 original counties of Pennsylvania. It goes all the way back to 1680-something. And so that's when the first Prothonotary was established. There's actually a letter from George Washington to one of the first Prothonotaries directing him to evacuate the records because the British were coming through Chester County and they were burning things on their way. And so the Prothonotary had to hastily evacuate the original courthouse, which was down in the city of Chester at the time, to prevent an issue with the British Army.
So this must have been right around the time of Battle of Brandywine.
Correct, the 17th.
So before
Yep.
So before that battle happened, September 11th, 1777, and then they, of course, went in and took Philadelphia. So it must have been right around this time. So they were burning all this paperwork. Is that right?
Well, they were just burning in general, and so in order to preserve it, General Washington sent a letter to the county prothonotary, and he hightailed it out of there with everything he could carry. So it's an old position, but getting back to Alex's point, I was essentially the head of the civil and family court system of Chester County. I had 31 staff members that I coordinated, a big budget. And so any divorce, custody, civil lawsuit, medical malpractice, car accident, slip and fall, people suing their neighbor because of their tree fell on their fence, what have you. We also did domestic violence, protection from abuse orders. We also issued U.S. passports. I presided over all the naturalization ceremonies because the Prothonotary's office has all the naturalization records for everyone in Chester County going back 1680 something. And so it's a ceremonial position, but also a very active bureaucratic position here in Pennsylvania. Not all Pennsylvania counties still have it. Some of them have merged the office with other stakeholder offices, but Chester County still has it as an independent elected office. So that's what I did.
That's my leading question, which is I was looking into this. I could be mistaken in saying this, but as far as I could tell, it seems like there are counties in Pennsylvania and maybe 1 or 2 counties in Delaware, and that's it. The other 48 states don't have this position. So did those counties never have this position? Like Pennsylvania and Delaware just that old? Or
part of it's that, but also part of it, all 50 states have a position like this. It's just most of them didn't feel the need to stick with the Greek, Roman, antiquated
the word that
term.
rolls off the tongue.
Correct.
Prothonotary.
Most
right.
counties would call it a county clerk. In fact, there was a county clerk in Kentucky who made worldwide news when she was refusing to issue marriage licenses to a same-sex couple.
So that would be someone. That would have been someone basically in the same type of role. Just a different title.
If I went to one of our national conferences, I probably would have seen her. Yes, it's a similar role. I presided over all the divorces. There's a different elected official who did marriage licenses in Pennsylvania. And in fact, just to show you how interesting Pennsylvania is, the person who issues marriage licenses is the Register of Wills. So they handle death and marriage, which is a really fun combination. But then all the divorces in Chester County would have my name on them. So it's interesting division of labor, but yes, essentially every county has something like a prothonotary out of all 3,000 some counties in the country, but they're all labeled differently and they all have a different division of work as to what falls under their parameters.
All right, Matt, so I have an idea. Just hear me out. Hear me out. I'm envisioning, so my wife loves Law & Order. She loves Law & Order, SVU, Special Victims Unit, horrible, horrible things. I'm thinking we do a spin-off Law & Order Prothonotarian.
I'm down.
Just all this. I mean, this is all fascinating stuff. Wills, driver's licenses, all this stuff kind of reports.
Passports.
I mean, that stuff I could watch an hour episode of every Monday night.
I realize you're being somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but I could definitely write a few seasons. You would not believe some of the stuff that went down at my front counter. We were talking earlier about 2 a.m. Walmart tours when we were in between takes, and I have to tell you, the people who need government assistance run the gamut. I mean, you have really, really average citizens, and then you have folks who are a little bit bored and we're their most accessible form of government that's the quickest drive from their house, and they just want to get some attention and create some havoc at the front desk. So I saw a lot of things, and I have a lot of really funny stories. We also did legal name changes, so I have a whole bag of anecdotes about the goofiest things people tried to change their name to. So there's
there are laws about certain names you can't be named, right?
Well, there are laws about the parameters of a legal name change, and there are specific steps you have to follow because they want to make sure that Alex Studd doesn't owe Matt Holliday $50,000, and he's really just changing his name to hide from his creditors or his criminal background or what have you. So there are all sorts of things you have to satisfy to be able to do it. I don't know that I would stipulate to the fact that there are specific names you are not allowed to have under the Pennsylvania statute anyway. And in fact, I did see some very bizarre things occur.
So, I mean, not to be super controversial, but I mean, it is controversial. Could someone, while you were in this position, someone legally wanted to change their name to Mussolini or Adolf Hitler? You couldn't legally stop them?
I could not, no.
Wow.
You've kind of ruined my whole next question. Because I was wondering, like, you know, as the Prothonotary, did I mess it up?
No, you said it right. Very proud.
Okay. As a Prothonotary, like, now, I don't see you as being a very evil person, but let's say you were. Could you just be like, no divorce for you? Like, is that the type of thing you could do, or is it more just, like you said, more ceremonial, and you're just like, realistically,
So
if there's a valid reason.
Yeah. So I did have certain immunity under the law in the role, not dissimilar to other elected offices, like the president obviously has qualified immunity. So yes, to answer your question, if I was a schmuck, I could try to delay and complicate people's lives. And some of my predecessors did, in fact, do that on a variety of occasions. But in actuality, you're really there to provide supervision to an administrative arm of the courts. And so you try not to litigate or make a judicial decision, even though you're a semi-judicial officer of the court, at the counter. You try to allow people to get their petitions through to real judges who were elected for the purpose of ruling on these things, and let them have their day in court and not actually get in the way of people doing what they're trying to do within the bureaucratic confines of your office. But to answer your question, Ron, yes, you do have the ability to flex your muscles on occasion. It's not a good look, and I would not do it. But you would be shocked. I mean, there were even lawyers who would try to get me to assign specific cases to a specific judge because they thought that judge would rule more favorably on behalf of their client. Like, there's an opportunity for graft and corruption at the lowest levels of government. And while I'd like to think most of my colleagues never fell prey to that, I know my predecessor, who was in the office for 12 years, on a couple of occasions did, for that one specific example. So it's important to know who your local elected officials are and to try to prevent them from abusing what power there is in their office. And there's not a lot, but there's some.
Well, this is a little PSA, but I've always believed that your local officials are so much more important than your federal in terms of a direct impact on you and your life.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I've always felt that I would rather, maybe this is going to make me sound horrible, I'd rather someone tell me that they voted for their state and local governments than, oh, well, I voted for the president, and I don't care.
Right.
You know? So, speaking of campaigning for this position, and you won you held that position for some time. I think Ron and I aren't the only people who not only barely can pronounce it, but certainly only understand after chatting with you what it is, right, at the very highest level. What was it like campaigning for a position that's like that?
It was brutal. I'm not going to lie to you. So there's 500,000 people in Chester County. About 110,000 of them would vote in the odd year elections that decided who the Prothonotary was. And so the first time I ran, I won with almost 60% of the vote, 48 some thousand votes. And then the second time I ended up getting 65,000 votes. So the electorate got more engaged and more people were voting in odd years towards the end there. But I had to hire a firm. Actually, you guys know Justin. I had to hire a marketing firm, and we just had fun with it because we knew nobody knew what the heck it was or how to pronounce it. And so we had videos of like, what even is a Prothonotary? And we had videos that sold on the branding of my last name, the People's Holiday, I think Justin called it. And
he's a marketer at heart, that's for sure. We've had him on the show. Yeah.
Yeah, he is. So, and I had people come up to me and say, like, I've never heard of this office before you held it. Like, how many people have been in this office? How long's it been around? And I was like, well, we didn't do the best job.
1680s.
Right, we didn't do the best job of advertising for the first 300 plus years. So it's funny, but when I'd go door to door, and I probably knocked on a couple thousand doors. When I was doing that, I found that the only time people knew who I was, the second I knocked on their door, lawyers, people who worked in the legal field, or people who had recently been divorced. Because like I said, the Prothonotary's name is on their divorce decree. And so there were times during the reelect when I would knock on someone's door and he'd be like, "You're one of my favorite people." And I'd say, "Why?" And he'd say, "Oh, because you got me away from my ex-wife." So you never knew what you were going to get. But I would say 80% of the time when you knocked on a door, they had no clue what a Prothonotary was.
Wow. Well, so I do want to switch gears, but keeping in the same line of politics, one of the things, Matt, I've known you for quite some time. We talked about it earlier, 12 years. And you and I haven't always seen eye to eye politically. However, one thing that I think I've always really respected is, and this is a quote from you, is I've always put partisanship on hold to foster good relations for the betterment of the people I serve. And I'm not being tongue-in-cheek here. I'm being very sincere when I say, why is this concept so difficult for our politicians to understand?
So that's a great question. And I have to tell you, I think it's in large part due to the primary process in this country. I think that the error of sitting with your, in the United States Senate, every state has 2 U.S. senators. There was a time when they would sit together regardless of what their partisan identification was, because they were the two people representing Pennsylvania. The error of statesmanship and working across the aisle and having it as a badge of honor that some of your closest friends in Harrisburg or in D.C. were from the other party, it's now become a liability. And so if you try to work across the aisle, if you try to foster relationships, if you try to be effective, essentially, someone will come along and try to outflank you if you're a Republican to your right, if you're a Democrat to your left, and accuse you of being a patsy to the other side or being too soft on the other side, and then fire up your partisan base by saying, unlike Senator so-and-so or Prothonotary so-and-so, I'm going to give you the red meat you want. I'm going to fight the other side. I'm going to take it to them. And unfortunately, about 20 years ago, that line of campaigning started to become the primary avenue for outsiders to take down incumbents. And so when that happened, there were a lot of people who just said, enough, that I'm going to pander and I'm going to act like being affiliated with the opposite side of the aisle is a cardinal sin, and that's how I'm going to stay in power. And so for me, for instance, one of the things that I've enjoyed about my career, there were times that the other party would actually call me up and ask me who should be running for state rep, or would I be interested in running for mayor, or this, that, or the other thing. And I'd have to politely say to them, like, I'm happy to help you with suggestions, but you do realize I'm the chairperson of the other political party in this area, and we're not playing for the same team on this particular match. And they'd be shocked because, I was a young person, I was a student, I was involved, and they just assumed because I was moderate in my rhetoric that I was the same party as them. And one of the funniest things that happened, I'll never forget it, Westchester used to have a cozy restaurant. And at the time, there was a councilwoman named Carolyn Knitta. She's now the state senator for our area. And she asked me out to lunch and sat me down in 2009 and asked me to be her campaign manager for mayor. And I looked her right in the face and I was like, Councilwoman Knitta, I'm happy to help you across the aisle, but you do know that I'm registered with the opposite party. And she was chewing a piece of lettuce, and it came out of her mouth because she was so surprised. And she was like, I didn't know that, but my offer still stands because I don't think it matters. You're so respected on our side that I don't think anyone would be mad if I had someone from the opposite camp running my campaign. And so I ended up helping on her campaign. I was not the campaign manager, but I did end up helping on her campaign a bit, and I helped her beat her primary challenger, which she only ended up doing by like 15 votes or something like that, if I recall, to go on to become mayor of Westchester, which is how she became a state rep and then eventually state senate.
So did you ruffle some feathers with the idea of...
A few. Luckily, I was young enough back then. It was the year I graduated from college. So I wasn't necessarily too high on everyone's board that they were monitoring. But to give you another story, and I guess this is where I'll out my partisan affiliation, I accidentally ran into President Clinton on the streets of Westchester back in 2016. He was outside Penn's table, and I was coming back from a service project. And I saw a bunch of my neighbors gathered outside the restaurant. And they're like, Matt, come here, come here. So I walked down, and I'm like, why are we all standing outside Penn's table? They're like, the president's here. So he comes out, and he shakes my hand, and we're making some small talk. And he asks if we want a big group picture. And we're about to take this big group picture. And at the time, I'm an incumbent county elected official for the Republican Party. The newspaper's there, and they're taking the page for the front page of this. They're taking a picture of the front page with this big group. And the photographer's counting us down. He's like 3, 2, and all of a sudden, my brain just kicks into high gear, and I'm like, oh my God, I can't be in this picture. So I duck down at the 11th hour behind this group of people, and so you still see the top of my head in this
that's
photo.
Awesome.
But that's how bipartisan I've attempted to be in my career, or before I exited politics, my previous career. And so it has been difficult at times, because I know, to your point, Alex, I would have had the Mickey taken out of me by our county chairman had he seen me on the front page of the county paper.
He didn't identify you by the hair.
He did not identify the scalp. At the time, it was a lot fuller. The hairline wasn't quite so thin and unusual. So he did not identify the scalp.
Yeah, well, I think, to be someone who, I'm pretty moderate. Some people wouldn't say that, but I think I'm relatively moderate. And I think I speak for a lot of people where I share so much frustration with this. Like, I feel that politicians are voting based on the way they should be voting, based on what they feel that they should be versus what they actually believe. And I'll give you a recent example where Ron and I, we grew up in Western New York. That's why Ron is wearing a Buffalo Bills shirt. And then we moved to Delaware around high school, middle school age. Right? Well, the U.S. representative for where we grew up, rural Western New York, his name's Tom Reed. You might be familiar. He made the news recently.
I did see it.
Because he's a Republican. We grew up in rural America, right? So it's a generally conservative area. And he came out where we grew up near Buffalo, New York. There was the shooting that happened recently. And he said, you know what? We do need some tighter regulations as it relates to gun control. He's a Republican. He's been a Republican for years. He says, hey, maybe we should make for an assault rifle, we should make the age 18 to 20. Within 3 days, he lost all of his sponsors. And he withdrew. He's no longer running for re-election this fall. And you think, this guy, he must have known. He must have known, like, what I'm going to do is political suicide. And yet he did it anyway. And, man, I don't know a whole lot about Tom Reed, but that takes balls.
Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, the upside to our republic is that you don't have to be independently wealthy per se to hold higher office. In Rome, to go back to being boring historians, you literally had to have 2 million sestertii to be a Roman senator. So if you didn't have wealth, you couldn't hold office. And part of that was because there was no public remuneration. You were not paid to be the senator. You did it as a civic give back, essentially. And so while that is great, you also don't want to bar 89%, 95% of the public from serving in higher office because they can't afford it. So there are a lot of politicians who are in a position where they've been a congressman or woman or a senator or a state senator, state rep, county prothonotary, whatever, for years, and they count on that income. I mean, that'd be like Alex having to retire or resign from his job because he believes that, take your pick, that children should have access to a free nutritious meal at lunchtime if they can't afford it. I mean, that's crazy that Alex would have to resign from his day job because of what he believes and then need to polish up his resume and go find a new job because he took a position. And obviously I picked a very uncontroversial position on purpose because I didn't want to go into a deep dive. But my point is that these folks, their career is everything to them. It's a very difficult profession to be in. You're putting yourself at the mercy of every friend and neighbor and person who knows you from the grocery store every 2 to 4 years, depending on the office, unless you're a U.S. senator, and then it's 6 years. And it's not easy. You have to raise a tremendous amount of money. You have to work day and night. And so their careers are everything to them. So when their internal compass does not align with what they have to do to hold on to their position, you separate the wheat from the chaff, and you find out who is actually a statesman and who's got core values and who is willing to say and do what they have to do to stay in office. And unfortunately, I think what we have seen in the last 15 to 20 years is that 90% of our federal and state elected officials are probably falling into the category of folks who will say and do what they have to do to maintain power on both sides of the aisle and pander to their primary bases.
And anyone who falls outside of that is ostracized. They're either not going to get reelected, or they are shunned. I mean, you look at, and I know I'm picking on the Republican Party, but that's because I know the Republican Party probably a little bit better. You look at Liz Cheney, Mitt Romney. Those are two individuals I actually have a tremendous amount of respect for. Yeah. Yet within a lot of the Republican Party, they are seen as traitors.
Right.
And it's hard for me to understand that, because I go, why is someone who speaks out for what they personally believe in, what they believe to be true, and not just following with, hey, this is what the party says, why are we penalizing them?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because at the very least, you would think that as an elected official, you aren't just representing the party. There is some individual component where you understand, you see, you have your own perspective, right? That does represent the constituents that you represent, right?
Well, you would think, right? That's why in this country we vote for people, not for parties, right? In Europe, you vote for a political party. And if that's the way we're going to go, then why don't we just go that way? Why should I vote for individuals if they're going to be forced to vote down a party line anyway?
Right. Because I think I also think that at least I would hope that I think that as we as individuals grow, right, and I think elected officials, correct me if I'm wrong, you all grow as well. It is an opportunity that as you get older, as you get more experience, as you have more wisdom, it's actually a perfectly normal and natural cycle for you to say, hey, I've since changed my opinion on this because of what I've learned.
No, Ron, you're a flip-flopper.
Right.
Maybe. But, like, that seems like it should be something that is actually not just, no, you're a horrible person because you disagree with the party. It should be almost applauded to say, hey, Matt, I'm surprised that this is your position as you started, but as you've changed, maybe you've become more moderate. Like, I feel like some of those shifts shouldn't necessarily be ostracized. There should be some more middle ground, especially with how crazy it is lately.
Historically, in this country, we had Dixiecrats, right? They were conservative Democrats.
Right.
We even have, like they call them log cabin Republicans. They're gay rights Republicans. You have these people who say, I agree with an aspect of this party, but not entirely.
Right.
And to me, shouldn't we embrace people who are independent minders? I'm being biased here, obviously, but like think for yourself, not just vote down the party line, especially since these parties have changed significantly over the years. And maybe that's sort of my next question for you. And this is going to be a little leading, but, I think years ago I would have identified as a Republican. And I think where I struggle with is I find that the religious right has taken the party in a different direction than what I found to be the roots of the Republican Party, which is, hey, let's have less government. Let's put private matters. That's between either the state or, even better yet, the individual to decide.
Right.
And somewhere along the line, whether it was Pat Buchanan or whatever, I have found that the Republican Party has gotten not small government at all. And so then it's like, well, if you're actually someone who believes in small government, truly small government, I don't believe that there is a party for you. I'm curious, Matt, I know this is a loaded question, but where do you see the Republican Party, as a member of the Republican Party, or at least you were, where do you see the Republican Party going in a post-Trump world?
Yeah, so that is a very difficult question to answer, but I will do my best. Just to back it up a little bit, I would say that both parties have run to their extreme ends. So the Republican Party has gotten far more conservative. The Democratic Party has become far more militantly progressive. And so what you're seeing is a lot of Americans left in the middle. And Ron mentioned earlier, representing your constituents, but also still having your beliefs. Part of the problem is, as I mentioned, Chester County has over 500,000 people. They were all my constituents. So just because someone didn't vote for you, just because someone voted for your opponent, doesn't mean they're not your constituent. You still are elected to represent their views. And that's lost on a lot of politicians nowadays. A lot of politicians only pander to the people who will be voting in their next primary election. And so what I have found, to Alex's point, Donald Trump kind of broke the traditional boundaries of the Republican Party and reshaped them in a lot of ways. The Republican Party had not been a populist party for over 100 years. Globalization and fair trade and free trade and reduced tariffs and all that kind of economic policy that was designed to just let a rising tide raise all boats, had been the trademark of the Republican Party. And then Trump came along and, it was make America great again, and we need to have manufacturing back in this country, and NAFTA ruined everything, and these trade agreements ruined everything. And so slowly but surely, he started changing the focus of the party in certain paths, but he also changed the tone of the party. I mean, when I was growing up, yes, Newt Gingrich and President Clinton would dust it up on occasion in the 90s, but you look back at how they treated each other compared to the knockdown, drag-out fights of today.
Right. It was practically civil.
Correct. Yeah. It really was. And if you actually go back to the generation in which I was born, the 80s, I mean, Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill, the Democratic Speaker of the House, were thick as thieves half the time, and they worked very well together and had a very cordial personal relationship. But my point is, Trump has reshaped a lot, not only in the Republican Party, but also within the Democratic Party, because both major parties, whether they want to admit it or not, are often influenced by the president of the opposite party. So part of what made the Republican Party get a little nutso, in my opinion, in the clinical definition, is that when President Obama was in office, some of it was an overreaction to the cultural shift that occurred during President Obama. If these are his positions, we're going to run and take, the opposite positions as quickly as possible. And the same thing happened when Trump was elected. The Democratic Party suddenly wanted to put as much distance imaginable between themselves and the middle so as to not even remotely be seen near the Trump positions. And working bipartisanly with him was a death sentence within the Democratic Party because nobody wanted to be tagged with that. So I can't answer with any absolute assurance what the future of either major party is. Time was 40 years ago, before any of the three of us were born. The party of the South was the Democratic Party. And Republicans were the party of New England and New York, et cetera, with Rockefeller. I guess I've actually come back 50 years because I'm going back to the 70s. And when Richard Nixon did that realignment, it not only realigned us geographically, but it realigned our positions and our values and our partisanship. We talk about Betty Ford, the wife of President Gerald Ford, and how hard she was advocating for the Equal Rights Amendment in the 70s. And at the time, the Republican Party was fully for it. Something that blows a lot of people's minds is 6 out of 9 United States Supreme Court justices who voted to make Roe v. Wade the law of the land were Republican-appointed judges. I mean, things have shifted dramatically in the last 50 years in this country. So, go ahead.
I always say, who put in the EPA? A Republican. Right. It was Nixon.
Right. Yep.
Who put in the national park system?
Teddy Roosevelt.
It was Teddy Roosevelt, a Republican.
Yeah.
And yet, why don't we think of conservation of our land, preservation, sustainability? Why are those seen as like, oh, well, any Republican cannot possibly believe in that? I don't understand that.
Because this country suffers from tribalism. If you look at the fact that your brother is wearing a Bill shirt, you grew up in Buffalo, Bills are where it's at. The upper state people in New York are going to support those teams, and they're going to have beef with the downstate people out of New York City.
Well,
their teams.
Just screw the Giants.
Just to be clear, there's only one team from New York
that plays in the state.
That is.
Okay, yes, this is the Meadowland argument. Fine, but let's not go down this rabbit hole for a moment.
It's all good.
My point is, we as a people, whether you want to blame it on evolution or what have you, going back and back and back, we find reasons to belong to subsection tribes. And so we want to have people to identify with. We want to have commonalities with a core group of people. But the best way to have those things is to have an us versus them mentality. Like our identity exists because they
common enemy,
and they're our common enemy. So somewhere along the way, that became infused in our national political conversation. And so there's so much of that. If you actually sit and talk to people who didn't care for Bernie Sanders or Joe Biden, but they were going to support one of them because they're a Democrat. And it didn't matter. I mean, obviously, Trump was not ever going to get their vote, but it wouldn't have mattered if the Republican Party had nominated John Kasich or if they had nominated the guy who cured cancer. I had so many people tell me door to door, I've never voted for a Republican before. And I'd say, I'm running for Prothonotary. Like, I'm not going to change the national position on anything that you truly care about.
But you might, because it's possible.
Right, exactly. And so people would say to me, where do you stand on pro-life, pro-choice, or stuff like that? And I'd say, honestly, my views have zero influence. The only thing that could happen is someone could slip and fall in front of the Planned Parenthood in Westchester, and their civil case will come through my office. That's about it. Like, I have zero say on the topic. But people wanted to know where I stood before they would tell me whether or not they would vote for me.
Yeah.
But I had people tell me, I've only ever voted for 2 Republicans in my life, Richard Nixon and you. And Richard Nixon's the reason I didn't vote for another Republican for another 50 years after that. So don't let me down. Stuff like that was a common refrain for me. But my point is that tribalism is so strong. There's such a deep need to support whoever your tribe's chief is, that I had a lot of Republican friends. So I'll just come out and be honest on air, and hopefully I never run for office again and this doesn't come back to bite me. I am a Republican. I'm a lifelong Republican. I did not vote for Donald Trump in 2016. I did not vote for Donald Trump in 2020. And I had Republican friends who I would sit there and talk with, and they'd say, well, I have to vote for him because I don't want Hillary to become president. And I say, well, when did that become our country? Like, it's always the choice of the lesser of two evils.
Lesser of two evils.
You should be proud of who you vote for, even if it's a third-party candidate or something like that. I know there's a lot
Gary
of people
Johnson.
Right. I know there's a lot of people who think that's flushing your vote down the toilet, and they're not wrong in the way our system works. But at the end of the day, we have to do something differently, because if you're only going to do what your tribe says to do, your tribe can't be right 100% of the time. There are issues that the Democratic Party is right on in this country. There are issues that the Republican Party is correct on in this country. You as a voter should be able to vote with your feet in the direction that you think is going to improve this nation. And part of getting there is going to be changing the primary system and going more like New Hampshire does, where you don't have to be affiliated with one of the major parties. You could show up that day and say, you know what, John McCain's a cheeky guy. I like him. I want to vote in the Republican primary today to support him. Or, you know what, I want to have the opportunity to decide whether or not we're going to have the first female major party candidate or the first African-American major party candidate.
Yeah.
Give me the Democratic ballot in 2008. Well, you should be able to walk in and exercise your vote. I have so many friends in Pennsylvania who used to be Republicans or used to be Democrats, got fed up with the process and decided to disaffiliate from the major parties and their independents. Well, they can only vote once a year now. They can only vote in the general. And most elections are already decided by the time you get to the general. So they're giving up half the right.
I think you bring up tribalism as such an important part of the problem. And, I think what really bothers me is I love discussing political ideology. And I would say I love political theory. I can't actually have political conversations with most people because if you talk about anything that alienates the political party line that they affiliate with, all of a sudden you're attacking them as an individual. And I will never understand that. Why can't I attack something negative I don't like about the Republican or the Democratic Party without you taking that personally? And so what ends up happening is I think a lot of people are just not having political discourse, which I think is actually doing more harm. It creates even more divisiveness because now you go, well, I've never talked to somebody who believes in X, Y, or Z topic, but they must be Satan.
Right.
If they believe that, and it's like, well, no, these are actually your next door neighbors. You've just never had the conversation and you've never had the time to actually understand where they're coming from.
Yeah, there was an old saying that a lot of parents taught their kids that, when you get invited to your friend's house for dinner or what have you, you're supposed to avoid politics and religion at the dinner table. And while I understand the wisdom to it because it's meant to keep things cordial and nice and polite, if you're not exposed to other viewpoints and if you're not able to discuss two defining factors of society, you're going to stay in your own little echo chamber of thoughts and ideas, and you're not going to be able to see things from the other side's perspective. And while I don't want every single dinner table in this country, not that there are many of them left, unfortunately, to turn into a mashed potato food fight over politics, I do think that, to Alex's point, we should be able to have calm, rational discussions. And where we disagree, we should be able to kind of bring the temperature down and disengage on that topic without anyone blowing a gasket.
Yeah.
Right? Because I mean, that's the thing where I feel like your political affiliation in some ways is kind of like a religion, right? Which is to say, it's your faith based on a set of theories about how to improve the country and how this is going to provide the best lifestyle for everybody.
And everyone else is going to burn in hell.
Well, maybe that, but realistically, I mean, that's kind of the trouble is like, okay, so you can't have a dissenting opinion. I mean, it is just based on faith. You're basing it really on just some intangible ideas about what we think, and you don't know. All we can do is kind of go with the best of what we understand things today. And that's where I think at the very least, it's important to have that dialogue. So yes, Alex and I can disagree. Matt, you and I can disagree. But at least if I can walk away and say, I understand why Matt disagrees with me.
He's not a bad person.
Right.
Yeah. These are his pros, cons. I disagree with him, but he's got a reason for it.
Right.
I explained my pros, cons. He disagrees with that, which is fine. It's totally fine for us to disagree with things. But, it's perfectly acceptable, I think, to also walk away and say, you know what? Maybe I was wrong. Maybe Matt is right, at least on this thing. And that's okay. It's okay to change your mind because we all grow. And
wouldn't that be incredible if people actually did that, Ron?
It would be. But, I mean, that's what I'm trying to get at is, like, how crazy is that the idea that you can adopt policies that maybe one party has and another doesn't, it's foreign, but it really would make things a much better place if people were at least a little more open. Because I think that, end of the day, we do all grow.
Right.
And it's part of that growth is acknowledging maybe I was wrong, right? Like we talked about, you've mentioned it a few times now, Matt, how as we all get older, we all have different perspectives. Things change in our life, and many people do shift their political allegiances. You could be far left,
That's okay.
far right.
Hillary was a Republican, and
right. People forget about that.
Reagan was a Democrat. It's okay.
Right.
And Trump was a huge Democrat.
He was Democrat, right.
He used to take out full-page ads in the New York Times criticizing Ronald Reagan and defending abortion rights. And, I mean, he was a fiercely liberal New York Democrat for 30-some years, right up until he decided he could capitalize on bashing Obama.
Yeah.
And if somebody like he is able to do that, then why can't we all?
Well, I don't know.
Except I don't think. Right. But the biggest thing, I mean, I get your point, Ron. The biggest thing is I don't think his beliefs were genuine. I think his beliefs were, how do I get elected? But I get your point.
Right.
So
we're all able to change.
I want to kind of lighten the mood before we wrap up. I mean, this was good. This is great, fun content. Of course, it's a little deep. It's a little deep, Ron. We're getting into the read the Leafs conversation. Right? What are the Leafs? Right? We talked about earlier. You just got back, Matt, from Italy.
Yes.
Can you talk about that just really briefly? I know we're running out of time, but I think a lot of people look at Italy as that's got to be. There's so much history there, the Roman Empire.
Yep.
Someone who's never been, can you quickly just talk about the experience you had?
Absolutely. So to Ron's point from just a moment ago, expanding your horizons, broadening your horizons, growing as a person, there's very few things that can do that as rapidly for a human as international travel. I think, especially for Americans, this is such a young country. I remember one of the times I was in San Diego, they were all proud of this building that was built in 1880, and it was one of the oldest buildings in the city. And I remember being like, my house in Westchester was built in 1874. Like, what are you talking about? Not the one I'm in now, but the one I was renting at the time. And so it's the same way with Europe. I mean, we talk about like, oh, we've got buildings that are from the late 1600s, and they're like, that's nice. We have buildings that are, before Christ. So it's pretty neat when you're in the Pantheon and you realize that structure has stood on that land, even though it was rebuilt on one occasion after a fire, for over 2,000 years. And you see what they were able to build with, very little technology, if at all, with just manual labor. There were no cranes, etc. And it's breathtaking to see the amazing capacity of the Roman Empire to change the world. They gave us roads, they gave us running water and aqueducts, etc., which are still being used today. And so, I mean, obviously roads existed before that, but they gave us paving stones and made them more of a real thing, which is why the expression "all roads lead to Rome" was coined. But to answer your question, it's absolutely amazing country. It's very humbling to realize the small part of the giant human tapestry that we are each a part of. It's beautiful geographically. It's breathtaking. There's not a part of the country that isn't stunning visually with the landscapes, which is probably why the empire thrived as well as it did and provided such natural beauty for the Renaissance to spring out from there. Their commitment to public art is phenomenal. The food is amazing.
Just say, I hear the pasta's good.
Oh my God, the pasta is second to none. If you like pasta, although interestingly enough, everyone assumes it's pasta. Pasta's Rome's thing, but when you go to other parts of the country, Florence, Bologna, Venice, etc., they each have their own thing. So Florence was very wealthy. It's the capital of Tuscany. There was a lot of cattle in Tuscany. So while there's certain dishes that are affiliated with the working class from Florence, a lot of beans, etc. The upper class kind of had the bistecca alla Florentine, which is the steak that they perfected over hundreds of years. And so that's their key thing that they're known for, and it's just delicious. Gelato, of course, comes from Italy, and if you haven't had it, do yourself a favor. Even here in America, it's good. There are definitely good gelaterias. We have two in Westchester, but it's nothing.
Go to Rita's.
Yes,
right?
Exactly. A gelato.
They invented it.
Yes, it's the same thing.
Yeah,
it's
the same thing.
Oh,
you little Italian ice, right?
I have Italian.
Italian.
I'm thinking about sending us hate mail right now if they're listening. No, but in Italy, it's second to none. It's just delicious. And so there's a lot of food culture. There's a lot of art culture. Wine.
Don't forget coffee culture.
That's true, actually. Lavazza,
right.
Yeah, they're big in cafe Americano and espresso and cappuccinos, and they're big into all of it. I mean, they're kind of like our great grandparents. When you sit down and listen to their stories, you realize just how rich their lives were, and they did a good job of passing it down. What's interesting is I always say I could never live in Italy, but I could definitely retire in Italy. I'm a little too.
Oh, that's interesting.
I'm a little too type A for the Italian people. Somewhere along the 400 AD era, they turned in their super high efficiency, let's conquer the world and make everything better for a dang, we have beautiful landscapes and great food and great wine, let's chill attitude. And so,
whoa, Matt, are you saying there are consequences when everyone retires at age 50?
I'm saying it has an impact on how well the country functions, believe it or not. Taking off for 3 hours every single afternoon for siesta has an impact on how your society operates. And it's actually funny because Milan is the industrial center of Italy, and they are much more wired like Americans. They're like go with their workday. And everyone else in Italy makes fun of them and like craps on them, even though they're holding up the GDP for Italy pretty much by themselves because everyone else is on siesta. So it's kind of funny. But in multiple cities, I heard people comparing the Milanese to Americans and how intense we are about work and working to live versus living to work and that kind of stuff. It was interesting.
Huh. Well, very interesting. Last question of the night. I know we went way over time, but I think this was a lot of fun chatting with you, Matt. What's next for you? Is there a potential campaign? Is there potential political options for you?
So for the last 2.5 years, I've been the executive director of the Chester County Bar Association and Chester County Bar Foundation. I still serve on 13 other boards as a volunteer, but this is my profession now. And I love what I do. We were able to give away $175,000 to local charities last year from the Bar Foundation.
Wow, congratulations.
Thank you. Through some of our hard work and my staff and I's dedication and our boards. With that being said, I don't think I'll ever run for professional politics again. However, in Pennsylvania, the mayor of Westchester and Borough Council of Westchester is a part-time gig. I think you get paid $4,000 a year, so it's very nominal, and it's expected.
So you can live off the $4,000 for sure.
Right,
for sure.
Yeah, definitely with my mortgage. But I think the idea is it's more meant to be done on nights and weekends. So there's a chance that I would consider running for local office down the road. But for now, I'm vice president of the Business Improvement District for Westchester. I'm on the Greater Westchester Chamber of Commerce Board. I'm president of 5 different nonprofits, including the Westchester Downtown Foundation. I'm able to still do what I love to do, which is build this community into the best version it can be through other ways besides the ballot box. And so that's what I'm focusing on for now. But I wouldn't say no to running for mayor down the road.
Awesome.
Well, I have to say, Matt, grazie mille for coming on. We hope you had a great time. And thank you so much. It's been a complete pleasure.
Prego, grazie.